and men have equal rights. The written law isn't biased. When it comes to divorce or separation cases, either member of the couple can be forced to pay maintenance to their partner if their partner has depended on them for money. However, men are more likely to pay maintenance than women because men usually earn more. The laws surrounding what happens to children after a divorce aren't biased either. The court has to treat the welfare of each child as the most important factor. But in practice, more children are likely to live with their mother after separation than their fathers. Now, the Children's Minister is proposing new legislation to ensure judges give fathers a legal right to spend time with their children after a divorce or separation. In a recent letter written to MPs, Edward Timpson said that both mums and dads should have the opportunity to play a positive role in their children's lives, adding the words, when it is safe and in their best interests to do so. So to discuss the rights of fathers, mothers and children in divorce and separation cases is Ken Sanderson, Chief Executive from Families Need Fathers, Nadine O'Connor, Campaign Director for Fathers for Justice, Robert Hush, a family law solicitor, and on the telephone, Nick Woodall from the Centre for Separated Families. Should the rights of fathers to spend time with their children be legally recognised? I'd like to ask you first, Robert, family law solicitor, paint the picture for us.
Well, first of all, I think it's important to look at the law as it stands at the moment. We have the Children Act, which has been in place now since the early 1990s. And what that piece of law does is it puts as the main concern for any court the welfare of the child. And so the focus is on the child's welfare rather than the rights of either parent. And I think that's an important point to make at this early stage. The second thing that I'd like to say about the draft proposal that's been produced by the government is that it doesn't actually, as your introduction suggests, give any extra rights to either mothers or fathers. It simply tries to show that there's a presumption that, if I could just quote from the draft, it says that the court should presume, unless the contrary is shown, that the involvement of a parent in the life of a child will further the child's welfare. There's a problem with that, I think, which is this, that if you accept the suggestion that's made in that draft, it draws us into a discussion that inevitably, I think, will flow from this, which is that the more involvement a parent has with a child, the more that will further the child's welfare, and I think that's problematic.
I think fundamentally we go back to the point that the child needs to be at the centre of any decision made in terms of divorce or separation cases, and that is, am I right, Robert, that is as it's already outlined in the law, but the problem you see is the fact that it comes down to the time spent with the child.
Well, at the moment, the Children Act establishes that the paramount thought or concern for the court should be the welfare of the child. That's the most important thing. And then the statute goes on to remind the judge of various things that need to be taken into account, the wishes and feelings of the child, any risk of harm, and a range of things. What this amendment seems to do is to confuse the situation a little bit by bringing in a presumption that involvement in a child's life will further the child's welfare. I don't think anybody would have a problem with that.
Yeah, I'd like to step in here, Julie, please.
Please, Nick.
I think it's very important to recognise that actually the Children Act and the basic premise of that, which is that the child's best interest is the court's primary responsibility when making its judgment, does not change. There is nothing that's going to change there. And at the Centre for Separated Families, we absolutely fully support that, because what we're after is providing the best outcomes for children. But what we also know is that far too many fathers are being pushed out of children's lives, and that is bad for children. It's been shown to be bad across all of the indicators for children, from their emotional and psychological adaptation to the change to their even their financial and health outcomes for them. Far too many fathers are being pushed out, and what this seeks to do, this amendment, is to redress that so that it's actually directing the courts, when they're making a judgment about what should happen to children, to consider the importance of both parents in a child's life. And it seems to me that that is fundamentally important, because although we've got a gender-neutral law which says that either mum or dad can provide the main day-to-day care for children, in in fact, what happens is that in 90% of cases, it's mum who ends up with the main day-to-day care for the children. And that's nothing to do with the fact that fathers earn more money or work more than mums. It's simply a reflection of the gendered expectations that we have about what parenting should look like in this country.
Yeah, over a period of time, judges sort of reflect their own lives in the sort of judgments that they make. And many of them may have been brought up by a nanny, or dad has sent them to public school or whatever. So their relationship with their father might not have been that good. The Children Act in 1989, I have to agree wholeheartedly, was a great piece of legislation. But somebody called Dame Butler Schloss, who was a judge at the time, set some precedent that totally went against the wishes of the politicians when they drew up the 1989 Children Act. So what happened was that dads were only involved in exceptional circumstances, and that is clearly not what the courts want or what society wants. I mean, the YouGov research that was done in the summer showed that 85% of the population thought that mum and dad should be equally involved with their children.
Just explain to our listeners your organisation, Families Need Fathers. I mean, it's quite obvious by the title, but just, what are you campaigning for?
Well, it's not actually all that obvious from the title. We're not a father's rights organisation. We're a children's rights organisation. And what we're seeking to do is make sure that the government comply with the United Nations Convention on Rights of Children, which says that post-separation, Article 9, they should have an ongoing relationship with two loving parents. Now, I think the wording there shows that it's two loving parents. If one of those parents, I don't know, is a drug addict or an alcoholic or someone who is very violent, then we wouldn't say, obviously, that they should spend unaccompanied time with that parent. But maybe over time they can.
But I think we need to, Ken,
Nick?
I would agree with what Robert was saying earlier on to a degree, which is that we run the risk of forcing children into care patterns that don't work. And I know that Families Need Fathers does have very prescriptive ideas about what shared parenting should look like. Your website talks about shared parenting must look like children are picked up on a Friday night and then dropped off on a Monday morning and things like that. What we would like to see...
I don't think it ever talks about time.
It does,
Nick.
it does, Ken. Well, it does. I was reading it just yesterday. What we really need to be looking at is getting away from this winner-takes-all situation that we have in the family courts. We have something in our family courts where we provide one parent with the care of the children and the other person is relegated to having what's called contact. I can't think of anything more horrible, a more terrible way of describing a parent's relationship with a child than contact. We need to get away from that. The family courts should be there to help parents who are struggling to work out arrangements, to put in place caring arrangements where both parents are involved, that are responsive to children's changing needs over time, and that help both parents to find ways to offer strong and influential relationships with their children. And that is what the government stated its aspiration was.
OK, Nadine O'Connor from Fathers for Justice. Now, what's your response to what the government proposals are in giving fathers more legal right to see their children after separation?
It's very clear when you look at the small print, and you have to look at the detail here, that actually what they're proposing isn't going to give dads any more rights than they've got at the moment. Let's go back to 1989. That is a Children Act which has been in place for many years now, which has not kept up with society. It does not reflect society as we have it today and the role that mums and dads both play. The 1989 Children Act states very clearly, and this was brought out in the Norgrove report a couple of years ago, that fathers don't have any rights, and Norgrove said actually that dads shouldn't have any rights. Now, I'm glad that the government have not agreed entirely with him, but the proposals are not, if dads think that these proposals are going to give them equal rights in law to see their children, then they are sorely mistaken. I do not think that if we were to come back in 12 months' time, the situation for dads is actually going to be any different. On and I call it a bad week, I will have something in the region of 400 emails coming in from desperate dads who simply want contact with their children. And we do not have a system in this country at the moment that reflects what dads need to do with their children. Let's look at some facts. We have not kept any records since 1989 of the outcomes to children. So while Rob says that the Children Act does X, Y and Z, there is no evidence to support that the 1989 Children Act does act in the child's best interest. The phrase the child's best interest has got to be the biggest lie perpetrated by the family courts in this country, because nobody has kept any records. I know more about my client's tub of ice cream than these judges and the family courts know about the outcomes of the children that go through their courts. Now, there are lots of statistics around. 3.8 million children in this country are growing up without a father. 1 in 4 children do not even consider the father to be a member of their family. These are statistics that we should not be proud of. This is a horrific catastrophe in this country. We've almost got an epidemic of family breakdown. The courts are in meltdown. We're going to have no legal aid for a lot of cases come next year. We have got parents representing themselves. Judges admit that they're in meltdown. The number of cases going through the courts are increasing. The law does not reflect society. And in April 2010, David Cameron stood in front of me on 2 separate occasions, and he promised that if he was elected, he was going to give dads equal rights in law to see their children. Now, he's gone back on that promise. He promised a wholesale reform of family law, and what we've got is tinkering that actually is making the situation worse, because if you look at the fine print, it says that there's going to be further layers of legislation coming in, and where it's safe for those children to have contact with their parents, we now have the suggestion that you actually only have to suggest that there's a problem. So we don't need any hard evidence. We already have a problem of false allegations in order to deny contact. So now you don't even have to provide any hard or soft evidence. You only have to suggest that the father shouldn't have any contact with children. That is going to lead to further allegations, more litigation, and more dads not getting to see their children.
You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London. I'm Juliet Spare. To discuss the rights of fathers, mothers and children in divorce and separation cases is Ken Sanderson, Chief Executive of Families Need Fathers, Nadine O'Connor, the Campaign Director for Fathers for Justice, Nick Woodall from the Centre for Separated Families, and Robert Hush, a family lawyer.
I find it very disappointing that we're still pitching this discussion in terms of fathers' rights and mothers' rights. Really, what is at the centre of this is what is best for the welfare of these children, and that's what we should always be thinking about. Can I just go back to something that Nick Woodall said earlier, which is about it is right that we should try and move away from a hierarchy of orders. At the moment we have residence orders and contact orders, and part of the problem is that parents see that in terms of status and importance. The Norgrove recommendations were that we move away from that, and the recommendation has now been accepted by the government that we will replace those orders with something called a child arrangements order, which hopefully will be much more neutral. And I hope that the government will go further and take on board other recommendations that were made by the Norgrove report, that more emphasis needs to be placed on enabling parents to try and reach their own agreements that meet the needs of their children and worry less about what their own status is in terms of residence or contact.
Can I just say, because I think...
Yeah, Nick, you come in first.
I think Robert makes a very important point. And I think that the government is starting to tiptoe away from the idea of care and contact. I would support something that Nadine has just said, which is that actually this is simply tinkering. When you actually look at the proposed wording, it's largely meaningless. I mean, the Family Justice Review already says that courts start from the principle that contact with both parents will be in the best interest of a child. And what it's just talking about is that parents should have involvement. It doesn't talk about the strong and influential relationship, which is what the government claimed its aspiration was. So I would agree with Nadine that actually we're not going to see any difference at all in 12 months. But I think that what Robert says touches on something which is a far deeper problem. It moves outside of the realm of family laws, because what we know at the Centre for Separated Families is that we have parents who come to us who've been through the family courts, who have got a shared residence order, who think they're both going to be treated with the same status, if you like, as parents. But when they enter the outside world, we still have those clearly, sharply divided roles of the parent with care, as it's called, and non-resident, or sometimes even worse, absent parent. So even when you've got a shared residence order, one parent will get, and it's the parent who has a child benefit entitlement, will get child benefit, will get child tax credit, will be able to make a claim for statutory child maintenance, and will be able to get housing credits. The other parent, even though they may be paying, maybe offering 50% of the care, will not get any financial support, and in fact may be required to make financial payment to the other parent, and is likely to be treated very, very badly by most of the organisations, statutory and voluntary sector, that they come into contact with. And it's that deep-rooted gender discrimination that goes on in the family, in the world of families, and separated families in particular, that needs to be dealt with. We can't just solve this through legislation.
Ken, you mentioned when I asked you to describe the title of your organisation, Families Need Fathers, it does sound like it's for the rights of fathers, but you said it's not, it's for the rights of children. If we're to sort of get rid of this gender discrimination, then we need to go back to having groups just for children, call them rights for children, not rights for fathers.
Yeah, our organisation was set up in 1974. So, yeah, it reflects the position then. But unfortunately, it hasn't changed much in the last 38 years. I'm surprised, actually, at the agreement I've got with Nick at the moment, because the Centre for Separated Families actually oppose a presumption of shared parenting. We don't, because we think it's the first step along the way. I think what we need to do, and I agree totally that what we need is a change in our culture, where when families separate, when dad goes down to the pub and says, I'm separating from Nadine, his mates don't say, well, she was a right son, so you're doing the right thing. And when mum goes to coffee morning, her friends don't say, screw him for every penny he's got, don't let him see the kids. We need that cultural change, and I think that this will be the first step along the way.
But I don't think that cultural change can ever be achieved by this sort of tinkering with statute law. I don't think it's going to help at all. And
so don't you think then that a couple going to court with the knowledge that the court will see them as having rights, or the child having rights to a meaningful relationship with both of them, will stop them going to court in a winner-takes-all sort of mindset?
Rob first.
Well, I just want to say, I think that's the irony of this proposal, is that it's clearly addressed at the very small number of very complex and high conflict cases. And it seems that we're ignoring the vast majority of parents who are prepared to try and work together. And perhaps we should be focusing our efforts more on that and enabling parents to reach agreements that meet their children's welfare.
If the law says that there's going to be an equal share when they get to court, then the presumption will be that there's no point going to court. So why drag your children through court?
There is no talk about shared parent. There's no talk in this statute, of this proposal as it's drafted, talking about shared parenting or equal time or anything.
And that's why this proposal is not worth the paper it's written on. This is an illusion of change without any changing. All we're doing is shifting the deck chairs here on the Titanic. We have a serious problem. You have to have a right in law, a legal, put it in law, that both parents have a right in law to see those children after divorce and separation. Then the majority of people will know where they stand, and hopefully the numbers going to court will reduce. But at the moment, nobody knows where they stand, and the person who is the gatekeeper, who has hold of the child at the point of divorce and separation, can call all the shots. The other person is running around like a headless chicken with absolutely no rights. So we have to, I'm the only woman here. I believe in equal rights. Okay, if this was the other way round, there would be people on the streets shouting from the, from top of their voices. Why is it acceptable to be putting in law something that gives fathers no rights? We've gone for equality.
We've gone. Children's welfare is more important, and it would be wrong to focus on parents' rights.
But why are we not saying, hang on, mum can see the children where it's safe to do so? The whole presumption is that the person who's applying for contact is the risk. Therefore, in the majority of those cases, it's going to be dad, because mum has got hold of the children physically, dad's already been kicked out. Why is it then that the presumption is that the dad is the risk? Mum could be equally the risk, as could mum's carousel of boyfriends that are coming through the door the minute the dad has left. Statistics show that children are far less at risk from abuse where both parents are actively involved in their lives and are in an equal footing. So why is it that we have legislation that implies one person is a risk and that person by default is going to be the dad? You said that why are we talking about fathers' rights? The reason I'm talking about fathers' rights is because I've got 36,000 plus members who are desperate for contact with their children. We've got over 13,000 people on our Facebook page. I am inundated. I mean, I've got a full-time job, but I am inundated with emails and desperate requests from dads that shows to me there is a problem. And we want equal rights for women. Why is it that we cannot have equal rights for dads? Society, as Nick said, has got to change. We have an anti-male, anti-father society out there.
You're listening to the Voice of Russia in London, and we're discussing the rights of fathers, mothers and children in divorce and separation cases. Joining me in the studio is Ken Sanderson, Chief Executive of Families Need Fathers, Nadine O'Connor from Fathers for Justice, Robert Hush, a family lawyer, and on the telephone Nick Woodall from the Centre for Separated Families.
You can't deny the wealth of evidence that shows that the lack of a father or indeed a mother in a child's life has a significant detrimental effect on that child right through. And that's not to say that there aren't parents out there who are bringing up children on their own because the other parent won't be involved, who aren't doing a fantastic job and doing the very best. It's not about that. It's not about saying that parents can't do a good job where they're in those circumstances. I think that Ken's right when he talks about the shadow of the law and parents making choices in the shadow of the law, but I would like to know from him what he thinks, how he thinks the law has changed, or what this proposed wording will do that's different.
Yeah, well, the proposals, I mean, they aren't being discussed in Parliament yet, and it's sort of pre-legislative look at them at the moment. And I'm actually speaking to a special parliamentary select committee about it next week. So what we intend to do is make sure that things like the presumption that when it's safe to do so. I mean, why shouldn't? Hold on. Well, listen, that's what I'm trying to explain to you. Hold on. What we want to see is not when it's safe to do so, but unless it's not safe. So there's no presumption that a dad will have to prove they're suitable. It will be up to the authorities or the mother to prove that they are unsuitable through evidence, and the same sort of evidence that is there in public law cases when the authorities want to remove a child from their family.
And is that what you mean when you say in the proposed legislation it keeps the children at the heart of protecting the child is paramount, and actually...
But that's already in the legislation. It's in what's known as the welfare checklist.
It's
already there. And what's been said, and Nadine is absolutely right when she says this, that this has been added when it is safe to do so, has been added, and it's added all the time because there is an assumption that dads are dangerous to children.
And it's
well, I think actually
appease the feminists,
I think actually it was added because a number of groups, including Bananas and the NSPCC, wrote to the Prime Minister earlier this year to express their concerns about it. And other people have drawn on the Australian experience, which suggested that there perhaps should be more thought given to protecting children from harm.
Well,
so I think that this has been slipped in at the 11th hour just to try and deal with that criticism in the hope that it will eventually get to
Well, when you look at the evidence that came out of Australia and a lot of the organisations that deal with domestic violence in this country and the women's rights organisations like Gingerbread have argued that the Australian experience of 2006, the changes in their legislation increased the amount of domestic violence. But it simply isn't true. And the Institute of Australian Family Services have reported that it's not true. Professor Parkinson, who is the president of the International Society of Family Law, also says it is not true. But it's been brought in to appease those who argue strongly that really the proper place for children is with their mum and that dads should be only there if mum allows them to.
Or let's be honest, Nick, dad should only be there as the cash point. You know, that's what they've been, made to be over the last 10, 20 years. Dad is the cash point. He's not considered as anything else. It goes back to all the wording that you spoke about earlier, which is that the person who holds the child benefit book is the gatekeeper and gets all the money. Dad is there just to pay. You can abandon your child tomorrow as long as you pay. Ken, I'm interested in the select committee. I mean, you've been invited to talk to a select committee. I have considerably more members than you do. You take government money, so you're paid to say what the government tells you to say at the end of the day. Why is my organisation not invited to these select committees? I put in a 1,000-page representation to Norgrove on his review. we had a cursory meeting, and it was a bit of an insult, really. Yet, they turn around and they have a go at dads. We've got almost more members than the Lib Dems, for goodness sake. Yet we're not invited into Parliament to talk to people or put across our point of view. We certainly don't take government money.
But do you think that, to a certain extent, people don't necessarily know what Fathers for Justice are really doing? I mean,
look,
there's stunts that have been on Buckingham Palace, Bristol Suspension Bridge. I agree, it gets headlines, but I think you need to go beyond the headlines for everyone else to understand.
We do. We back up everything we say with facts and figures. I mean, Ken's already admitted that, his title doesn't even cover what he does. He says families need fathers, and he doesn't even represent fathers. He's managed to kind of neuter the father organisation. We do what it says on the tin, although, we've got 30% of our members are women, but they are the wives, the girlfriends, the grandparents, the grandmothers, for example, who don't see their children. We are a growing organisation by the day. As I say, we're on a par with most small political parties. We have got a voice. We didn't take any government money, so we got going literally on a shoestring here. A ladder and a Superman suit, and we got front page headlines across the world. We got the message out there. That was our publicity. That's the way we had to do it. But since 2008, we have been talking to politicians. We've been, trying to get our message across. We had numerous meetings with the government, what is now obviously the government, because we met both Lib Dems and the Conservatives before the election. We got a very, very concrete 12-point plan out of them before the election, which they've done a U-turn on. How can you actually even have confidence that these proposals are going to go through? This is a government that's done something like 35 U-turns since it got into power. So from going from the point of saying that, we want to bring dads back into the family, which is what Cameron said, and give them equal rights, to a piece of legislation which, quite frankly, isn't worth the paper it's written on. This is their way of kicking fathers' rights into touch for the rest of this government term. They won't get in again in 2015. The Labour Party won't touch it because they're headed up by a feminist organisation. This is not going to come back onto the agenda until 2020, probably, if we're lucky. That is another generation of children lost. Nothing is going to change on the ground. I guarantee that my numbers are going to go up, my email inquiries are going to go up, and in 12 months' time we are going to see that the courts are in meltdown and the situation has got no better.
Our members are saying that they're desperate to have a life with their children, but they're denied that because in court all sorts of allegations can be made, and because family courts are behind closed doors, there's no proof needed, and it will delay things by another 6 months to a year, and in which time CAFCAS will come along and say, well, we don't want to upset the status quo because that will upset the child, and it can't be in their best interest. A child's best interest is for both parents to act like adults and see the children as the focus.
We've had CAFCAS turn around to dads and say, we really wish you'd drop your application because it's upsetting mum. I'm sorry, this is not about mum. This is about the kids. And what about upsetting dad because you've stopped him seeing his children? There is absolutely no thought for what the father's going through.
Well, I just think that this proposed draft piece of legislation creates more problems than it solves. What it actually does is it misleads parents into thinking that they've got rights which they don't have. And I think that the government would be much better off focusing on bringing in the child arrangements order, avoiding hierarchical, status-laden approaches, and helping parents to reach agreements that are best for their children.
I'd like to thank all my guests: Robert Hush, a family law solicitor; Nadine O'Connor from Fathers for Justice; Ken Sanderson from Families Need Fathers; and on the telephone, Nick Woodall from the Centre for Separated Families.